Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended lifeforms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution. Hey Brian, what's this?
Well, Jeff, this is our deep dive into the comic book world of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Yes, and it will certainly be a deep dive. I think we've bitten off more than we can chew, but we're going to find out.
I believe you're correct. I mean, we could almost call this a reaction to the comic books, since neither one of us have reviewed them yet.
Right, yes, this is a cold read.
This is a cold read, so we're reacting to what we see on the page. And just by looking at the very first page, the cover of this title piece that we're going to be working on, I'm a little nervous.
Right. There's a lot on the cover.
Oh, gosh, yes. So just to give us a place to start anyway, we're looking at the cover of IDW's comic book number 1, for Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and its top banner is bright yellow.
Yep.
And then there are multiple pictures of a character that I'm assuming is going to be Dirk Gently.
Yes, and that's some hair.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's interesting. He looks like a combination of Superman and Clark Kent.
Yeah, with a little Elvis thrown in.
Yeah, mixed in. So right off the top, we're like, well, that's not the character we know as Dirk Gently.
He's not portly.
Nope. He's attractive, thin, a little unusual, maybe tall, skinny. I don't know.
Yeah, he appears to be tall and skinny, but he's not next to anything.
Right,
so
and you're right. He looks like he has a, what would you call that? It's not a fade, is it? The haircut?
It looks like a pompadour, but the front is curlier than you would expect in the pompadour 50s hairstyle. But he's got the mutton chop sideburns.
Yes.
And the cover is basically a montage. Mm-hmm. It has a very scared cat in the very middle, mm-hmm. and it's surrounded by multiple versions of Dirk. Mm-hmm. Lower right, he's kind of on a Vespa. And upper left, he's sitting in a chair in his office, and he's jumping at the right of the page, and he's got a flashlight on the left of the page. And then there's a car seeming to be chasing him on the Vespa.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe that. Good way to describe that.
So that's the cover. I have no idea what any of that means, but we are about to find out. Page 1 is basically your copyright page that talks about the publisher and tells you who did what on all of them. So it's written by Chris Ryall, pencils by Tony Atkins, inks by John Livesay, 5 through 20, and colors by Leonard O'Grady.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know why pages 5 through 20 says inks, but they don't say who inked any of the other pages. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we know from our experience at conventions that the cover is quite frequently drawn by a different artist than the folks that do the work inside of the book. But you're right, it is a little odd that they've only listed the pages 5 through 20.
Yes, and if you look on the far right of the cover mm-hmm. page, mm-hmm. it looks like Tony Atkins is the one who signed the cover. So the cover would have been done by Tony Atkins.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. And of course, we neglected to mention that the title of this particular adventure is The Interconnectedness of All Kings. And that's on the cover.
Yes.
And then there's a subtitle here on the second page, or the first inside page or inside cover. It says Schrodinger's Copycat.
Right. And it's got a little image in a leaf that seems to say the San Diego Natural History Museum.
There you go.
All right, so we are going to dive into this. So it jumps back to Memphis, Egypt in 1345 BC.
Mm-hmm. Oh, my goodness.
So we're at a time where a young man is going to be coronated as king, and he is assuring his friends that it's not going to change him. And they're really kind of skeptical with the, being a king has a lot of responsibilities, you're going to change. And he's going, no, no, no. And then one of the servants drops something and creates a crash and a distraction. And he immediately changes from this, hey, guys, how's it going, to just coming down on this guy who just dropped something, and he's going to flog him and have him become a stone bearer. And then he's like, as I was saying, the crown isn't going to change me at all. And his friends are kind of freaked out going, whoa,
Absolutely.
What just happened here?
Mm-hmm. Right. So on this page, we're looking at what appears to be obviously part of Egypt. And
yeah.
So on the top panel, you see what appears to be a bird, an eagle maybe, something like that, flying across a cityscape of ancient Egypt. And the other folks in the pictures are lightly clothed, as you would expect in the hot summer sun, and watching their soon-to-be king with some trepidation. And, of course, at the end, where he sends his servant off to be flogged and sent to the stone mill, they're quite skeptical of his behavior.
So was it his dinner that the guy dropped? Because he called it his repast.
Yes. Well, there you go. Now we can argue whether repast is a meal that they're currently eating or whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, or some variant therein.
Yes. One of the things that kind of cracked me up is that the name of the soon-to-be king is Akhenaten. And then he's got two friends. One of his friends is Neferhotep, and the other one is Craig. Didn't realize Craig was an ancient Egyptian name like Neferhotep or Akhenaten.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go on to page 2 of the story. So here on page 2, the friends who watched their friend who's going to become king freak out after somebody dropped something are a little bit nervous about their future. They do not think he is going to be a kind king, and they're building a giant tomb for him, of which they're saying it's not for us. And then this giant imposing cloaked figure comes and confronts them about their talk. And they're pleading with the guy saying, oh, it's just idle talk. We didn't mean anything by it. And he's like, oh, relax, relax, relax. And he calls himself the immortal Mr. Bird. And he wants to talk to them. And what did he say? That we may speak of the lifetimes of riches and power that I might provide you.
Right. And it's interesting here. Of course, the third panel from the bottom is the first time you see the vizier. And he does look quite imposing with the hood and his draped over his head and his crooked fingers pointing out towards the two young men as they kind of crouch in fear. And then he pulls back his cape and he's got a gold band with a serpent on it and a huge white handlebar mustache under his very prominent nose.
So was it Wilford Brimley mustache?
Yes, it does look very much like that. Except Wilford would have had to lose about 80 pounds.
Yes.
And gotten extremely well built.
Right. All right, so on to page 3. We shift now to San Diego, California, and it is now the present day. and we see a plane approaching the San Diego airport, but something is screaming from the plane. And we cut and we see what appears to be Dirk Gently rifling through baggage. So he must be in the belly of the plane here, and he is looking for something. And here's where we get a little clue as to where this story is going.
Perhaps.
Yes, perhaps. It says Dirk is in San Diego via London via a catastrophic situation at St. Sed's College at Cambridge. And then there's a little asterisk which says it's a doozy of a story to come. So that's an editor's note. Mm-hmm. And then they explain a little bit about the fundamental interconnectedness of all things and that Dirk is a holistic detective. And the first step in solving the case that he is on right now is finding what he is looking for. Plane seems to be on the ground, and there is an airport worker who is at the plane opening the luggage compartment, and Dirk comes tumbling out as he opens it, and he just turns and walks away with a bag to the guy's surprise and amazement.
Right. And as you said, the interesting thing about this particular page is the second panel, where in the picture of Dirk rummaging through the luggage, there's also a mention of the scene we saw from the very cover page, the San Diego Natural History Museum.
Right.
And oddly enough, there is a animal carrier in the luggage area with a cat in it.
Yes.
And of course, kind of where I think this is leading, or what we suspect it's leading to, is a salmon of doubt. Some of what we're seeing here might lead us in the direction of that story. But I'm not so sure yet, because of course we've already had the introduction to Egypt, which is not the direction that salmon was going in.
Right. The labels that are listed San Diego Natural History Museum seem to be on multiple crates in the luggage department. So they're filling up quite a bit of the frame, so we don't know how many there are, or at this point, what is in them.
Right.
So we will go on to the next page 4. This page is outside baggage claim of the airport, and we meet a couple. We meet Estelle and Bill Parsnip. And as they are walking to the cabs or their parking lot or wherever they're going, Bill is complaining about a lost bag. And I'm guessing that it is the one that Dirk swiped out of the baggage compartment.
That would be the assumption.
His wife is trying to assure him that airports find lost bags. That's what they do. And he's still a little bit miffed because it seems to be an important bag that has something special in it. So he's worrying about it. And then Dirk barges through them to get to a taxi cab, and the guy just thought that was a rude gesture, but he does not seem to have recognized the bag at this point. And no. Dirk is calling for a taxi and saying that it's probably life or death. So page 5. So we see the cabbie who's asking Dirk where he's headed, and in the background we see Bill, who seems to have recognized now that that strangely dressed man has his bag. Dirk jumps in the cab and tells him to follow the first car that appears to know where it's going. And the Parsnips have a conversation very similar to what they had before about rudeness and how much they hate rudeness. Mm-hmm. But they're a little bit ominous because they want to have a conversation to Dirk about manners, and he calls it a capital idea. And they ask, whose turn is it? Mm-hmm. And the wife, Estelle, says, oh, let's call this one a palate cleanser. So her official turn is still up next. So we don't know who these people are or what they're up to, but I'm getting the yuppie assassin vibe from them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. They seem to be yuppie assassins. And I do think it's funny because, of course, their last name in this is Parsnip.
Yep.
And as we all know, the parsnip is a very light-colored vegetable. Mm-hmm. And this couple looks as white can be.
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, they want to follow Dirk. So Dirk got into a cab. that's telling him, I'll know the car when I see it. He always does. And the parsnips jump in another cab and say, follow that cab because that guy's got something that we want back.
Yes, the reminiscence is there.
I'm wondering if we're going to go through the nobody ever says follow that cab.
Yeah, that could be the next page.
So on to page 6. So on this page, we're seeing the cab following the cab, and the parsnips think that Dirk must be onto them because he's taking a very purposeful path. And the cabbie wants to know where Dirk is going, and Dirk is saying that the where is not as important as the why. He needs a safe place to open the bag. And the cabbie joked, hey, do you think it's a bomb? He's like, no, don't be silly. It's not a bomb. Well, I don't think it is. Realistically, it could be, but we won't know until I open it. And then the cabbie just slams on the brakes and says, get out. Dirk says, oh, really? You're going to leave me here? Wait, you surely don't actually plan to leave me here in the middle of... And then we go to the next page.
Right, and there's Dirk standing in the middle of the street with the other cab barreling down on him.
Yes. And then we get to page 7. The big cliffhanger wasn't that he was going to get run over by being left in the middle of the street. It was being left exactly where he wanted to be, in front of a tea house called Gumshoes and Tea Leaves. So the parsnips stop, and they decide to part ways at this time, and Bill is going to get out and check on Dirk, and he's going to send Estelle, because she gets restless, to do what they were going to do, because she's got this list. And she's eager to check the next name off her list, which happens to be her top 10 serial killers to emulate. So they're not assassins for hire. They are a serial killer couple who like to emulate other serial killers. And then there's a list of names of which you can't read any of them.
Right.
And then Bill goes on to follow Dirk.
Right, and it's kind of funny. Of course, the Gumshoes and Tea Leaves tea house is remarked by the driver for Estelle and Bill. It's a goofy detective-themed tea house. A great idea if you hate customers.
Right.
and the subtitle of the Gumshoe and Tea Leaves is Where to Find Great Tea? ? And Mystery Solved! !
Yes.
But it is quite funny. So they are obviously killers at heart. And in the final panel, Bill says, a woman after my own heart. I just hope she never comes for my actual heart.
Yes. So on to page 8. So I'm a little confused as to why this panel plays out the way it does. First thing that happens is Dirk just kind of walks into this tea house and he says, a true detective is in your presence now, and he's announcing himself, but nobody seems to recognize him or know who he is, and he seems that should be a little bit odd. And he wants to know why everybody's staring at them. And somebody says, well, you do realize, and then he says, that seeing the solution to problems is detectable in subtle patterns through which I solve crimes in utterly unique fashion? Yes, of course. And then she says, no, this isn't a real detective agency. It's just a tea shop. And I'm Susan Murtico, and this is Tanya Fong, detective aficionado, and also my wife. And then Tanya says, charmed. So even though Dirk is looking for a base of operations to run his business, I didn't think he thought that was a detective agency.
No, I think he knew it was a tea shop, but they thought that he thought it was a detective agency.
Okay, so it's one of those things. It's like, well,
yeah, it's pretty funny. I do kind of like this page because it's weird.
Yes.
And I like weird sometimes. It is funny, though. The middle right panel on the page, He looks a little bit like Wolverine, doesn't
Yes, yeah. Yeah, his face changes quite a bit from the steel jaw to the sort of a rounded mug.
he? Mm-hmm. And I love the kind of slumped shoulders of Tanya Fong and her charmed comment.
Yeah.
It just tickles me.
So now we're going to go to page 9. So on this page inside the tea shop, it all kind of now makes sense and is pretty funny. Dirk didn't know or care if it was a tea shop or a detective agency because it becomes a detective agency the moment he walks in.
Right.
And so he wants to look through the bag to solve this case, but Tanya, who is the detective aficionado who created the tea shop in the detective theme, wants to know what's in his bag and if it's a fingerprint kit and guns and all this other stuff. But then Susan brings over some tea and then plops it right on Dirk's bag, of which he gets upset. He's like, hey, man, that's on my bag. And then he's like, oh, this tea doesn't smell half bad. And then he starts explaining more of how he does his detective work as opposed to the fraud called Sherlock Holmes, who Tanya seems to enjoy.
Oh, my goodness. I think this is kind of funny. When you're looking at the middle 3 panels, you'll see Tanya in the second panel looks a lot like Velma.
Yes, from Scooby-Doo.
Yep, from Scooby-Doo. So it kind of tickles me because she's supposed to be the smart one, you know?
Right. I don't want to say that I'm disappointed, but I'm a little surprised at the lack of Easter eggs so far hidden in the background of these panels. Mm-hmm. We have a tea shop with a lot of books and a lot of decor and a lot of signage that they could put all kinds of little references to, but they don't seem to have any of that I've noticed.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting because you're absolutely right. I mean, tea and this opportunity just seems overwhelming.
Yes. So on to page 10. So now we take a jump because everything is, after all, connected to the San Diego Natural History Museum.
Mm-hmm.
The crates from the airplane have arrived at the museum, and it is going to be an exhibit of King Tutankhamun, who we met on the first page of this comic. And they have a brand new casket that has never been opened that they are going to open for the first time. So it's kind of a parallel to Dirk opening the bag for the first time to find what's in it as they are opening this casket to find out what's in it. Mm-hmm. And there's great mysteries and everything. And the pompous museum curator wants to hear nothing of a curse. But as this crate is being opened, some yellow gas comes creeping out and takes over one of the workers who is opening it. And then while the guy is still talking about the curses, the 2 people with him, man and a woman, seem to be taken over by this gas as well. And it's really hard to tell exactly what's happened to them, but it seems that they have aged and become dried up, mummy-like skeletal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's like a scene from Ghostbusters with the ectoplasm seeping into the people and turning them into mummy people.
Yeah, it does seem to be going into their mouths and eyes. All right, so let's see what happens on page 11. I can describe it, but I'm personally losing context and staging of who people are and where they are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So once again, the pompous museum curator is trying to talk down the curse and that there's only the beneficent King Tutankhamun and his friend, whoever he is. And the woman he's talking to can see these people being mummified or all the life drained out of them behind him. And he's thinking that, oh, maybe I want to just take a quick peek at what's inside this casket. And as he turns around, he sees the mummy who seems to have emerged from this casket and then sucked the life out of the woman that he was just talking to. And he says hungry. And as he says hungry, he sucks all of the life out of the museum curator, who falls on the floor with wood. Wood. W-H-U-D. Not a thud, but a wood.
Yes, and funnily enough, I think the mummy, because obviously as the curator director is saying he's going to take a look at this guy before he heads in for the evening, looks to me like it might be Craig. If you look at the face, the facial structure, he does look a little bit like Craig from the beginning.
Yes. In the bottom panel, the museum curator, who has now had all of his life force and bodily fluids, it seems, drained from him, has bad teeth. He had much better teeth when he was alive.
Yes, he did. Oh.
So we're going to go on to page 12. So here, who we are assuming is Craig, is feeling better now, and he is going to his king to take him out of his sarcophagus. And as he pushes the lid aside, he says, "Our time has come."
Do you think that's his king? Or is that his buddy?
Well, he's in the gold sarcophagus, which you can see in the top left panel, and he's got that headdress on.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I ask is the vizier said to the two guys, I can make you guys live forever.
Right.
I don't know. I agree with what you're saying. I just don't know that that's the king. He is worth...
Well, we may find out in the next... You know what I mean?
Okay.
This is our reaction. So to me, that's...
Yep, that makes sense. Makes sense. If we assume this guy is Craig, it does look like he's going towards the bigger golden coffin, but I think it's funny because he's got saggy pants.
Yeah.
And he opens up the coffin and he says, "Come, brother. Our time has come." And you're right, he's dressed with a royal headdress, but I wonder if that's the other guy, not the king. Who knows?
We'll possibly find out on page 13.
Nope.
Nope. So we've jumped to downtown San Diego, outside the library-adjacent homeless tent city. And then one of the homeless is on his phone talking with a buddy of his, and he's holding a sign that says, "You gonna eat that?" And he's trying to get leftovers from people who are downtown carrying their leftover lunches. And it seems that Estelle Parsnip is approaching, and he's all excited because she's got a styrofoam container of leftovers, and he's all by himself, and he doesn't have to share any with his friend. He tells that to Estelle, and she says, "Okay, but can we go somewhere private? Because it can be like feeding pigeons. You know, as soon as I give out some food, all kinds of homeless people are just going to crowd around. So let's go back here. And it's always better to do this without a crowd." And inside the styrofoam container, you can see a couple of knives.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Of course, in the very first panel on this page, he's talking to his friend on the phone, and he says, "Tell you what, Crowder, forget about your cup of tea. You need to be here to see this." So, which suggests that Crowther is one of the people that Dirk might be in the tea house with.
True. Yes.
But we won't know that until we get to another page.
So let's go to page 14.
All right. A short time later.
Estelle is outside crossing a name off her list because she evidently killed this homeless guy in the style of some famous serial killer. And even though I do enjoy some true crime podcasts, I cannot tell you who the 2 knives in a styrofoam leftover container serial killer is. Who she's emulating.
Oh, yes, and she's quite pleased with herself with her bright smile and blonde hair flowing in the wind.
Yes. She's asking Bill if his bag is still inside the tea shop, and finds out that it is. So she's like, oh, great. I'll make my way there and we can find a name on the list to take care of this guy. And Bill's saying, yep, because nearly everyone has wanted to kill an Englishman at one time or another.
And Bill is sitting at the restaurant across the street from the tea house.
Yeah, so you can see from the backwards writing on the wall, which we saw earlier in the taxi cab scene, is that Bill is in the restaurant Korsterfiends.
Right, and parked in front of the restaurant's a couple of Vespas. So I wonder.
Yes. Oh, yes. And inside the tea house, one of the ladies is asking Dirk to tell them about the case that he is on. So we will go to page 15. All right, so as we remember from last page, somebody had asked Dirk to tell him about the case, and he kind of points and says, well, if you take your tray off of it, I can get to it. And they're like, no, not your bag. We want to know about the case. What is it? Who hired you? Have you ever been shot at? And he's like, more often than not, I've actually received payment for my work. Yes, I appreciate your inquisitiveness. You might yet make a proper assistant. And then somebody else walks in, and he says, hey, I'd be a good helper. What about me? And he's like, oh, excellent question. What is it about you? Rather, who are you, and what are you all about? And he says, I'm Hamish. And then Dirk's like, oh, I assume there'd be more to your answer than that. So it's like, well, we'll get to the bottom of that later. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, okay, Mrs. Fong, you can be my assistant.
Right. And, of course, there's a reference here to the TV show because he keeps wanting to call her assistant. And Miss Fong has said to him, associate? And he says, no, semantics. And then again, yes. he calls her an assistant. She says, Tanya, please, and associate, please.
Yeah.
And then her wife says, Tanya, are you sure about this person? He might well be.
And we'll find out on page 16. And we find out that he might be unbalanced. And they go, no, the tray. And so this panel is Dirk taking the tray, giving it to Tanya so he can get into his bag finally without any more interruptions. But of course, Crowther comes rushing in, asking for help because his friend Virgil is dead and nobody can believe, and everybody's all trying to figure out what's going on except Dirk, who just wants to open his bag without any interruptions.
Mm-hmm. Tanya says to Crowther, did you say killed? Maybe we should get the police.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the common theme is that Dirk denies that everything is connected until it's connected in his mind. And he's right. complaining about the interruptions to his process.
Yes.
While Virgil leans on his bag and Dirk is just standing there holding on to the tray.
Yeah, and Tanya is asking Crowther what happened. Tell us. Page 17. So Susan is explaining to Dirk that Crowther is a homeless guy who comes there sometime. And then Dirk does this as recently as earlier today, I recall. And he says that his last shower was 5 days ago. He had breakfast of coffee, black. He's got comfortable shoes, lightness of soul. So he's doing this whole thing that everybody has ignored and did not refer to at all. And he tries introducing himself to Crowther, but got no response. Crowther's just going on about a bird that gave him and his friend who's now dead, Virgil, a phone. And Dirk sees the phone is gold and can't believe that birds give out homeless people gold phones. And Crowther is saying, not birds, just one bird. And he said it wouldn't cost us a dime neither. He says phone got nap thing. It's called solar power, S-O-U-L-E-R. And it lets me power the phone by perpetual motion, turning into something called a hotspot. So it seems that the phone will drain the life energy out of its users as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guess anyway.
Yeah, obviously the bird is reference to the vizier from the first pages. And that's where these phones apparently came from.
Right.
Which is weird, but interesting.
So I'm curious to find out if the king and his buddy Craig have come to the museum through these crates and are being reborn, how the vizier has survived all these 3,500 years or whatever.
Me too. But he does introduce himself as immortal in those first couple of pages, right?
True. So page 18. So I'm not sure what Dirk's angle is here, because he's thinking that he can solve Virgil's death by looking at Crowther's gold phone. Gold phone, gold phone. Dirk seems to be fixated on gold phone. He always says gold phone. He's not going to just say phone, but he is always going to say gold phone. And so he's telling Crowther that he will effortlessly link the phone and the reason for his friend's death. And then Susan and Tanya are talking, and they're thinking he's got his own case, and Tanya's finding everything fascinating, but Dirk is thinking, who's to say that this case and my case aren't also connected? So he wanted to know what Crowther and Virgil were talking about on this glorious phone just before he was attacked, and he tells him that he was going to have lunch with a nice lady in a flowered dress.
Let's see how long it takes Dirk to connect all these pieces together.
Yes. So we'll go to page 19. So here Dirk is now invested and interested in this case. And he said that San Diego seems to have a lot of women in flowered dresses because he saw a striking example of one himself today. So the connectedness of him taking the bag of the serial killer woman and the serial killer killing Virgil. He asks Crowther if Virgil knew the woman before had ever seen her, and he said that he'd have mentioned it because he knows everyone in town. And Dirk is convinced that it's time to get inside his bag and everything will be revealed. And Susan is saying that maybe he should stay focused on Crowther and his story. And this is kind of funny because Dirk is once again saying things like, I am indeed focused in ways that are not immediately obvious. So we cut back to Hamish, who is sitting there in a chair saying, hey, I checked the name tag on your bag and it's not even yours. And Dirk is claiming that it is now his more than ever.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. The only weird thing about this page is Hamish has something in his hand that's not obvious what it is, and maybe it's not important, but it's kind of weird.
Yes, I can't tell what it is either. So we will go to page 20.
I wonder if the colors are going to change after this.
Yeah.
This is the last page.
This is the last page. So Dirk is convinced that he is going to be able to show how the unfortunate incident with Mr. Crowther's friend is connected to his ongoing case, because proof of that is contained within his very bag. Observe, and he opens the bag, and then you have a whole bunch of shocked faces, one right after the other, and then they show an axe, a crossbow, tear gas, chainsaw, candlestick, rope, knives, arrows, look like darts, rubber gloves, and a book titled The Proper Disposal of Bodies. And Dirk just simply says, oh.
Yes. Oh, I think it's funny because, of course, the center page across is Tanya says, good Lord, and Susan gasps, and Crowther says, oh, shit, and Hamish says, oh, dude.
Yes.
And then, of course, largest bag, it's definitely an infinite bag of holding.
Right. Yes, because the bag that he was carrying did not seem to be large enough to carry all of these sharp items. I mean, it's a giant full-handled axe and a giant full-size crossbow.
That's right, and a full-size chainsaw?
Yeah.
Oh, and now we know why the coloring stopped at page 20.
Yes. Yes, we do.
Because it's the last page. And on the bottom of the last page, it says, next time the copycat killers go down their list, Dirk visits the zoo, and King Octancommon's curse writ large, all in Chapter 2 of The Interconnectingness of All Kings. Animal Husbandry and Wifery appears to be the subtitle for this next chapter.
Yes.
Okay, Jeff, so we've reached the end of this chapter. What comes next?
Well, we're going to do issue 2, but I think we are going to bring back the bonus episode.
Episode!
Woo! So instead of having to wait an entire month, it's just going to be a week or two, and we are going to put out issue 2 of The Interconnectedness of All Kings, with the subtitle Animal Husbandry and Wifery. So it seems that he's going to the zoo, so we're going to find out what that's all about.
Well, I guess it's time to hear those famous words.
This is the end. Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea, and our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Foods for Thought production.